Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is Jim Lehrer, author, newsman, really the journalist of our time. Thank you for joining us.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. This is terrific.
Well, you're here to talk about your new book, your 20th novel, which is called Super, and it's about this wonderful train adventure through the Southwest with former presidents and movie stars. We'll talk about that in a minute because that's what's bringing you here. But I want to speak to your life as a journalist. For 35 years, you've been with PBS. You and Robert McNeil started the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour. Then it morphed into the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. And now, just last year, it's become the PBS NewsHour. But you have set this imprint on all of us for news with integrity, news that we can absolutely trust. Tell us a little about your background and how you ended up in television news.
Well, I began as a newspaper reporter in Dallas, Texas, and I was fortunate to have been touched by many people in the course of my journalism career from then on. People who I made a mistake, for instance, of in the first few weeks that I was a newspaper man in Dallas. I was working the obit desk, and I got the names of the funeral home mixed up with the name of the deceased, and the managing editor said to me in no uncertain terms, "This is one of the most important things you do on this newspaper is get the names right, son." And those are the kinds of lessons I learned early. And from there, I was blessed to go with public television in Dallas, KERA in Dallas, and I was involved in an experimental news program that was funded by the Ford Foundation, a local program. And that was successful in its context. And at the time, when I left the newspaper business, I was city editor of the afternoon newspaper in Dallas, the Dallas Times-Herald. And I had written a novel. My first novel was called Viva Max. It was about the retaking of the Alamo by a group of renegade Mexican soldiers who marched up the interstate highway from Nuevo Laredo and retook the Alamo. And at any rate, they made it into a movie. Jonathan Winters was in it. Peter Ustinov played the part of the Mexican general who was in charge. But from that, I decided to write full time, and then the public television station in Dallas offered me a consultancy, and from then we started an experimental news program. And before I knew it, I was in public broadcast, and I've been there ever since. Moved to Washington in 1972. Went to work with Robert McNeil. We did the Watergate hearings. That's when we first collaborated in a big way, and then in 1975 we started the nightly program. It had the worst title in the world when it started. It was called the Robert McNeil Report. Worst television title. Can you imagine anything worse than that?
It could have been the Jim Lehrer Report.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That would have been vastly superior.
I was the Washington correspondent, and then my mother interceded, and it was changed to the McNeil-Lehrer Report. And then in 1983. It was only 30 minutes when we started, and we did one story a night for 30 minutes. And then when in 1983 we went to an hour, it became the NewsHour, and our whole world changed then, because when we did the half hour, the idea, we would tell people, well, watch your favorite nightly news program, then come to us afterward.
Your network.
Exactly.
Half an hour.
You do your network stuff, then come to us for one story. And then, but when we went to an hour, we said, we're no longer a supplement. We are an alternative. You don't have to watch anybody else because we give our news summary and all of that. And we, as you say, we've been through several manifestations of it. And but the basic purposes and the basic guidelines and the basic journalism has not changed in this 35 years.
Well, I like that you're not anchor focused. That you have an ensemble of fabulous news people.
Yeah.
And so, and also that you go in depth, and that there's not any trace of opinioneering that is so common in cable television. If you want the facts, you want to hear in depth from an expert, then this is where you go.
The point on this, which is something I feel very strongly about, is that there are three forms of journalism, legitimate, all of them legitimate. There's straight news reporting, then there's analytical journalism, and then there's opinion journalism. What I have a problem with is not carefully labeling each one of these for what they are. And we are fanatic about it, that this is one part. We're basically, those of us who actually work on the NewsHour, we're in the straight news business. However, we bring people on as guests who are analytical folks, and we also bring people on as guests who have opinions. But each kind of journalism that we do, that we introduce and then provide, is carefully labeled. To me, that's the most important thing. The person who reports should not also do the analysis and also give an opinion about it. And it's very confusing to people, and understandably so, because there's been some creeping movement across those lines that I think should never be crossed. But there's a lot of crossing going on.
But you did start out in print. You are a newspaper man,
Absolutely
aren't
right.
you?
Absolutely right. I'm a word person.
Yes, and so in the newspaper there is the op-ed page.
That's right.
There's the front page.
Absolutely.
So you actually, through your geography of how you receive the media, you know whether this is opinion or not.
Exactly right. And it's clearly labeled just by where it appears. Yeah.
Now, speaking of newspapers, what's going to happen? What do you think the future of newspapers is?
Well, I think it's uncertain, to put it mildly. I think the point of newspapers is not uncertain at all. In other words, the purpose of straight news reporting in print, just like it's the purpose of straight news reporting on television, on radio, or wherever, is to provide information to the electorate, to the people of the country, so they can have informed opinions and cast informed votes. So print is having a lot of problems now. There are a lot of obviously, and everybody knows that, they're in the middle of a revolution. The newspapers are not sure what to do, and the first thing they decided, we'll go online. Well, when they went online, they gave away their purpose for being, which was to provide independent news, independently gathered and reported. And so now they're trying to put the genie back in a bottle, and it's a little hard to do. But I'm more optimistic than my colleagues are. I believe that the need for straight news, the need for information is so critical to the democratic process that it's all going to come out. The newspapers may have they're going to have to do a lot of collaborating and form a lot of coalitions, where you may have a reporter who covers, say, the City Hall in Santa Fe, and he or she may work for the newspaper, but he or she may also do reporting on radio, for National Public Radio, or for whatever, and then for public television or a television program. They might also write blogs, but they amortize. Each one of those entities helps pay the costs of the serious journalism collecting and reporting, and I think that's where the future is. And there's already indications that the public, because the public is inundated with information, inundated with opinions, and the idea is that everybody has an opinion, and everybody has now access to something, either a blog or a microphone, where they can express it. And there's this overriding need that people now realize for somebody to kind of be a gatekeeper. Old-fashioned gatekeepers were editors of newspapers, or what I am. I'm executive editor of the NewsHour, and I'm a gatekeeper. And there's going to be a whole new generation of gatekeepers, and there are going to be many more of them. And they won't be all white men like I am, but they will be there. There will be people that people trust, and that trust has to be developed. And they will not only assemble the news, aggregate the news, and in the various coalitions and cooperative ventures, they will also assemble what the blogs have said, what the editorialists have said, what the screamers have said on radio, and whatever they do. But it'll all be there, because most people do not want to spend their all day sitting in front of a television screen or a computer screen, reading blogs or listening to people yell and scream about it. But they do want to have different views of the news story, and they want somebody to kind of put it together for them. And I think that's the future. Some of it's going to be print, most of it's going to be a combination.
Now, what is that Jefferson quote about an informed electorate?
If you Jefferson said that you do not have democracy without an informed electorate. A democratic society is dependent on an informed electorate, and the device, the only device for providing the electorate with the information that will make them informed are the journalists of this country, and the journalistic vehicles. So we have. It's not just about classified ads and making people laugh. This is about informing people in a way that is critical to the future of our country.
Now, in the new format of the NewsHour, you have this wonderful team of fabulous journalists, and you're kind of have expanded horizontally into
That's right.
the new media, so that you can go online now. Say you can't be home at 7 o'clock for the PBS NewsHour. You can find it online.
That's right,
and
exactly.
That at any time that you need. And you yourself, sir, have branched into the new technology on this trip. You are actually blogging, and you have called in some interviews on Skype.
That's right. I did that yesterday from Albuquerque. Did a Skype. It's on our blog now. I mean, on the online news hour. At first, I was resistant to it, thinking, let's leave that for the kids. And then I realized that's crazy. And they urged me to do it. They, meaning my colleagues at the news hour, particularly the online part, said, "Come on, give it a whirl." Also, we in the new world of the PBS NewsHour. It was one of the reasons we changed the name from the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer to the PBS NewsHour was just an acknowledgement that it is a team operation. Mm-hmm. And I've had some health problems in the past, and somebody also said to me, if you're going to be gone, 2.5, 3 weeks on book and station tour around the country, you ought to tell the folks where you're going, what you're doing. So they won't think you've dropped dead again, or that you've retired again, or whatever, or that you're not coming back. So anyhow, out of this grew the idea, well, give it a whirl. So they rigged my laptop in such a way that I could, put one of those little webcams on the top and talk to Hari Srinivasan back in our newsroom, and it's fun. It's not the greatest quality in the world, but it's fun to do.
Well, I looked at that. The quality was good enough for me on my computer, and I just think that it gives you a lot more freedom and a lot more versatility.
Exactly right.
But now, speaking of book tours,
yes,
I want to talk about your new book, which is called Super. And it is, can you tell us a little without giving away all the wonderful twists and turns? This is such a wonderful read.
Well, it's super as in Super Chief. The Super Chief being the ultimate luxury train of America that was run by the Santa Fe Railroad between Chicago and Los Angeles. It was all sleeper car, first class in every respect, had the finest food, some of which was delivered while the train was en route to little towns where people would catch trout and serve it, give it to the dining car. Or freshly baked bread. It would come out of a bakery in Newton, Kansas, and where the train would stop. And it was served on heavy silverware and heavy china, and there was a turquoise room in off by the dining room where was a private dining room where you could have parties and small cocktail parties, and if you wanted to have a really intimate dinner, you could do that. There was a barbershop on board. Obviously, they shined everybody's shoes, and they did everything that you could possibly. It was the ultimate luxury train. Now, my story is about essentially one round, and they called it the Train of the Stars. The reason they called it the Train of the Stars is because so many movie stars would ride that train. They'd go from Los Angeles to Chicago, arriving in Chicago in the morning, and then they would go late morning, and then they would go to the Pump Room, which is a really neat restaurant at the Ambassador West Hotel in Chicago. They'd have a long, leisurely lunch, and then they would get aboard the Broadway Limited or the 20th Century Limited and go to New York, where they would go to Broadway plays and do whatever movie stars did back then. And my story is about essentially one round trip. It starts in Dearborn Station, Chicago, goes to Los Angeles, and then there's a return trip. It took 40.5 hours to go each way from Chicago to Los Angeles. My story is about some movie stars that are aboard: Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert. I get former President Harry Truman, and some other kind of movie people. And then there's a little story about the atomic bomb. And
well, the Downwinders is particularly important for in New Mexico because our beloved lately deceased Stuart Udall had fought so hard to get compensation. The Downwinders were people who had gotten cancer by breathing from the atomic test.
Exactly right.
And so that's a wonderful subthread in this book. Exactly. Made it very appealing to New Mexicans.
Particularly, it comes up, and some people, particularly a guy gets on board and wants to talk to Harry Truman about what the impact of nuclear testing is. But the thing that I'm enjoying doing is going around the country talking about this book as I go to public television stations and book events and all of that. And because I was back in the 50s when I was going to a little junior college in South Texas, I was a bus ticket agent for Continental Trailways Bus Depot, and I learned how to call the buses.
This is what I'm hoping you'll do.
Okay.
Because yes, give us the call.
All right, let me give you the call. This is the Super Chief. Call for the Super Chief from Dearborn Station, Chicago, 1956, April, early evening, and the PA system goes, "May I have your attention, please? Passengers may now board at..." Let me try that. Wait a minute. I forgot. Okay, let me start again.
Okay.
Let me start again.
It's a long list.
All right, it is. "May I have your attention, please? Passengers may now board at Track 7, Train 17, the Super Chief. The Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe's first class, all-sleeping car streamliner to Los Angeles. Making stops only at Fort Madison, Kansas City, Newton, Hutchinson, Dodge City, La Junta, Raton, Albuquerque, Gallup, Winslow, Flagstaff, Needles, Barstow, San Bernardino, Pasadena, and Union Station, Los Angeles. All aboard! Track 7, the Super Chief, thank you for traveling the Santa Fe way."
Wonderful, wonderful. And you did that when you had your book, when your book tour went to Chicago.
Yeah.
And then in Kansas City, you went to Union Station.
And I gave it in Kansas, in Union Station. Union Station's a marvelous old train station that's been completely restored. It had fallen on bad times. They've restored it. And they had a book event there for me for Super. And I did that call for, I was 300 or 400 people there, which was really wonderful, really fun, really fun.
Well, there is such a love and nostalgia for trains and train travel. And also, you grew up, your dad had a bus company.
That's right.
And so you have been marked and love buses and love trains. But one of the first half of your memoir is called A Bus of My Own.
That's right.
And you actually have a bus of your own.
I do.
Tell us about you and buses.
Well, it's a part of the DNA. It's part of the bloodstream in my family because my dad worked in buses all his life. And as I say, I worked as a ticket agent in the 1950s myself. But I learned from my father, and it's part of me, that the idea of moving people from place to place for reasons that matter, like going to war, going to school, going to a funeral, going to your lover, or just running away from home, is the way you do that is you get on one of these magic vehicles called a train or a bus. And if you're a kid growing up and you see the train coming through the prairie and it doesn't stop, or you see the bus coming and it does stop, you think, one day I'm going to get on that train. One day I'm going to get on that bus.
And where does it go? What's it like?
And there's a whole other world out there that I'm going to see someday for some reason. And it is part of what I grew up in, and that whole idea that one day I would get it. I remember the first time I even got on an airplane. I was going to the Marine Corps. I flew from San Antonio, Texas to Washington, and those kinds of things, when you finally make that, or first time you get on a train, first time you get on a bus, first time you get on an airplane, it's like a freeing sort of thing. I mean, you are now going. You're going away for whatever reason legitimate or otherwise, you are going away, and it underlines this book, and it underlines a lot of what I've written and think about.
Well, I know you were a Marine, and I've heard you speak about all the reading you did when you were a Marine in Okinawa. When it would rain, you would read,
Mm-hmm.
all these books, and that's the novel Super is your 20th novel.
That's right.
And I have a couple of your other novels. I have the one last year's,
Oh, Johnny.
Oh, Johnny, which was very military based, a story
Mhm.
of a young soldier, and this wonderful Eureka, definitely a coming of middle age.
Coming to middle. And it's the same
America.
kind of thing. I mean, this man is a CEO of an insurance company in a city in Kansas, and he realizes his life hasn't worked out for him the way he wanted. Not from a business standpoint, but from a personal standpoint. And he runs away from home on a set of wheels on a Cushman motor scooter. Goes
Not
west.
the glamour of the super
Not
chief.
the glamour of the super chief, but the same pull is there, or push, I
Yeah.
should say, is there.
Yeah. And one other thing about your Marine background, one of the greatest gifts you've given, besides, truth in news, but at the end of the news hour, you have the honor roll.
Mhm.
And tell us a little about that, because it's a gift of acknowledgement to service people who have given their lives.
Yeah,
And it was controversial at the beginning. Tell us
It was
about that.
controversial. It's there because I felt very strongly, and everybody on our staff agreed that if somebody wears the uniform of our country and gives their life for our country, that they deserve 5 seconds of notice on national television. When we first started doing it, it was just a photograph of the service person who died, hometown, rank,
Age.
and age, exactly, and branch of service. And when we first started it, there were just a few people on the very, very fringes. One side said, "Oh my goodness, you're glorifying war by doing this." And other people, "Oh well, that's an anti-war statement." But we've been doing this for several years now, and we don't hear that anymore. People now understand that this is not politics of any kind of wing or any kind of belief. This is just something that we Americans do for each other, and it is you see the whole country when you see those pictures. The whole country, meaning, yes, some of them are kids, some of them are older folks, some of them are women, some of them are from very small towns that nobody's ever heard of. Some of them they're all of all races and of all beliefs. You could see that, and the important thing is that it's a reminder that war is about real people, about individuals. Yes, it's about great armies, and it's about all the great issues, but when the final analysis, it's one of those individual American kids, for the most part, who died, and for a purpose, that purpose being something that the country has decided is worth it, and all we do there is acknowledge their sacrifice.
And in the march of news and the newness of news, an old, long war, we need this reminder. They're still fighting. They're still
Right.
dying. The focus has gone on to other new problems that have to be solved.
Absolutely.
Which brings me to asking you about optimism versus pessimism.
Mm.
The news of the day can often be quite disheartening. And so tell me, are you an optimist or a pessimist?
I'm very much the optimist. You cannot be a professional journalist, a serious professional journalist, and be a pessimist. Because in order to ask people serious questions about things that matter, you have to believe that fill in the blank, the oil spill in the Gulf, a war or a conflict between nations, a health care reform issue, an immigration issue, you name it. You have to believe there are solutions to it, and the people in charge are going to figure it out. If you didn't believe that, you couldn't get up to ask people questions. The most optimistic people I know are people like me, who deal with the most serious news issues there are. You have to be an optimist to do that. And I am one of the most optimistic people I know.
And tell me, you have been in news, and you've been a journalist for so many years. What advice would you give to upcoming journalists?
Well, the first thing is you have to examine why you're in journalism. And journalism is basically little boy, little girl work. It's you listen to you hear a siren outside, and you, I wonder is that a fire truck? Is that an ambulance? Is that a cop car? I mean, where are they going? What happened? And if you hear the siren and you don't want to know where it's going and why, don't go into journalism. Some of the oldest people I know in journalism are 23 years old. Some of the youngest people I know are 76 years old. And it's all a state of mind. And it's the curiosity and the chasing of fire engines and caring enough to go to these places and care enough to find out what happened is what drives people into journalism. And if you don't feel it, don't go.
Well, I've heard you say that the most terrifying thing for you would be to wake up and not be curious, not have a new idea for a story.
Absolutely.
Well, what are you working on these days besides your wonderful book tour?
Well, I've just finished a new book. It's a nonfiction book about my experiences and those of others involved in presidential debates. I've moderated 11 of those.
Yes.
That's a hairy experience in and
Yes,
of
you
itself.
said scorching at one point was the word you used.
It's the ultimate double-edged sword because if you can make a mistake and it's scary. A mistake you can cost somebody the presidency. Decide who's going to be the next president. On the other side of the coin, the other side of the sword, if you get through it and it works, then it's the most exhilarating experience you could possibly have. And I'm working on another novel, which is geared to the Kennedy assassination. To experience, I was on November 22nd, 1963. I was a reporter
in Texas,
Dallas Times Herald,
yeah.
and was very much involved in the coverage that day and for 6 months after that. So this is it's not about my experiences, but it's based on it.
Well, as you said, fiction is 90% true and 10% fiction.
That's right.
And it's up to our readers to explore.
That's right.
Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. I've really enjoyed. Our guest today is Jim Lehrer, who is here on a book tour about his wonderful, wonderful 20th novel called Super. And so I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today.
The pleasure was mine. This was great.
And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.